Today I want to talk about the words meek and humble. I think these are two words that are vastly misunderstood in the modern Christian world. It's something I've encountered throughout my ministry, and I probably invite the criticism, and I always pause to give thought to it when somebody accuses me of not being meek and not being humble. But I also remember back to what the Bible says. I don't mind if people attack me, like they are probably right. I have enough ego to go around. But this past week, a friend of mine was attacked, not severely, but it was suggested that he needed to be meeker and more humble. The minister telling him this said, "You don't have enough education to be speaking out the way you do." Well, I think the Bible says go into all the world and preach the good news. It doesn't say you got to be an expert at it. How many times have you heard a minister say, well, witnessing is just one beggar telling another beggar where the bread is? Okay, then stop calling us too proud if we want to tell people about what's happened in our lives. I think about what the Bible has. Remember Moses, that meek guy who kills the Egyptian? He comes back 40 years later and tells the Pharaoh, "Let my people go. That's what God says." I don't think that was very meek. I don't think he was being very humble. And then he trots out in the wilderness leading millions of people. And kind of arrogant, don't you think? I can lead all these people through the wilderness out of Egypt, and they're going to be just fine. And then while he's in the wilderness, he gets a little angry at God and disobeys God. He got angry at the people and said, "Why do you do this to me?" And he got angry at the people and he struck the rock when God said, "Speak to the rock." And God says, "I've had enough of you, Moses. You can finish leading the people, but you ain't going into the promised land." And yet, the Bible at the end of Deuteronomy says there was no more humble man in all the earth. What about Joseph? He became second in command of all of Egypt. And he put his brothers down when they came to get food. And then he was next to the youngest, and yet he told the whole family what to do. Go home, get dad, and bring him down here, and bring everyone. Not real humble. Maybe these aren't good examples. How about King David? King David. Man, you read the stories of his battles, and he wasn't afraid to conquer anybody. That's typically not called a meek man. King David, he wasn't afraid of engaging anyone in battle, whether he was outnumbered or not. The only thing he avoided doing was attacking King Saul, because that was God's anointed king of Israel. Solomon, conceit was his biggest issue. He as much as said that himself. Read Ecclesiastes. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. I think Solomon was pretty high on his horse, and he had to learn. Going back to Deuteronomy, in Deuteronomy, God tells the Israelites to be strong and courageous. There's a dichotomy in teaching here. Now let's jump ahead and think about Jesus. He was a meek and humble man. Maybe. Of course, he was the Son of God. So he did everything perfect, and I'm not being facetious when I say that. That isn't sarcasm. That's sincerity. He was perfect in everything he did. Even when he confronted the Pharisees and called them dogs and whitewashed sepulchres and hypocrites and liars and deceivers. That doesn't sound very meek and humble. When he cleared the temple, he didn't go in a meek and mild manner and say, "Oh, please, would everyone just leave?" No, he was in there trashing the place, throwing over tables and running the animal chain sellers out and the money changers out. And there were armed guards in there, and he ran them out too. And then he hung around afterwards just to make sure nobody else came in. You don't think those armed guards went and got help? I don't think he was very meek and mild, but he was Jesus. He was the Son of God. So we can't afford to try and be like him, even though we say over and over again we should be like Jesus. What would Jesus do, and so forth. How about James and John? James and John. You ever read in Luke chapter 9 when James and John go to Jesus and say, call on fire on those people and burn them up? That doesn't sound very meek and humble. How about Peter and John before the Sanhedrin in the book of Acts? And they say, well, whatever you got to say, that's fine. We're going to obey God, not man. That doesn't sound very meek and humble. How about the Apostle Paul? All he did was challenge authority everywhere he went. Yeah. He goes into the middle of the marketplace and says, let me tell you about this God over here. You got all these other gods, but this God, let me tell you about him. And in Philippi, when the prison bars are shaken and the chains fall off and the doors open up, he doesn't leave. The jailer says, oh, let me come take you. And no, we want the authorities to apologize to us. You're talking Roman authorities. Whether they were Romans or not, they were appointed by the Romans, and the Romans ruled the world. Demanding an apology from them, that isn't very meek and humble. So, like in everything in the Bible, you have to understand the context of what is being taught. We should be strong in our faith. I believe that. We should have a strength. We should have a confidence to be able to share it everywhere we go. We should have a confidence in our salvation. We should have a confidence in God taking care of us. But where did this misunderstanding come from? Because like I say, one of the illustrations I use is one time I was giving a devotional to a men's group, and I said, you need to stand up and declare yourself as one of God's great men. Stand up in your community and let people know. And afterwards, a minister that was there was asked to do the closing prayer, and he basically said, well, Velcro's wrong. Now, he said it real nice, but he basically said Velcro's wrong and we need to be humble like Christ. Well, like I say, Christ wasn't always humble. So where did he get that wrong concept? He's a very meek and humble man. I won't deny that. And yet, he has the arrogance to stand in front of a congregation and say, basically, I am the one that can teach you. That doesn't sound very meek and humble to me. So what happened? Well, in the Middle Ages, before that too, but let's call it the peak of the Middle Ages, the Roman Catholic Church basically ruled the world at that time. And the Pope, several of them were notoriously famous for their sexual impeccadillos and for their collection of funds. Not just the Pope, but bishops, cardinals, collecting money like crazy. One Pope even is quoted as having said, the fable of the gospel is good for my pocket. I'm not trying to put down the Roman Catholic Church here. There have been some great popes. There were some in the early days. There have been some in the later days. And if I was a great historical student, I'd probably be able to find some good ones even in the Middle Ages. But there was a problem. I want you to think about Friar Tuck of Robin Hood fame. Was he meek and humble? Well, probably not. Not really. Not by modern definition. I mean, he's willing to fight with Robin Hood. Depends on which story you're reading / watching. But he and Robin Hood had a good go-around. Compared to the church leaders of that day and age, he was meek and humble. There's a difference, people. And what's happened is modern Christianity is still fighting against the Middle Age issues, where the highest people in the church were extremely not meek and humble. They lorded it over everyone. And so people like Friar Tuck were telling people, don't be like them. Be meek and humble. Don't lord it over everyone. So what happens? I talk about this and I talk about it. The pendulum swings this way. So to counteract it, people swing it back this way and say, be like this. What they're really looking for is the middle ground. Jesus was the middle ground. We need to learn to be like Jesus. That's really so true. Meek and humble, sure. Strong and courageous, sure. There's a place for both. That's the very essence of life, especially for a Christian who's in ministry. So, how do we apply that in today's church? I want you to think about the modern church now. We have ministers that are making millions of dollars on TV, or hundreds of thousands anyway, in a big church. This is just like the church leaders of the Middle Ages, isn't it? In the Middle Ages, they were selling indulgences. That's what triggered Martin Luther's rebellion. Today, they sell some of the more famous ones selling. I anointed this handkerchief myself and I prayed over it, and if you send in a contribution of $1 bazillion, I'll send this to you. And I exaggerate, but not much. You get the point. I wrote this book, and if you buy this book, I guarantee you God's going to have a message for you in this book, because he gave it to me. And you can buy this hardbound book, this beautiful cover, for only $69.95. And if it was a bestseller, it'd be worth about $20 hardbound. But God inspired it, so it's worth $69.95. Oh, and by the way, when you buy my book, don't forget to buy the DVD that goes with it. It says the same thing, but it's got me talking about it. So it's worth a lot more. We're going to charge you $175.95, and we'll take that in 26 easy payments of $250 each. Okay, the math doesn't work, but hey, they don't care. They're all about the money. When they tell you to be meek and humble, call them a liar. All they want is money. Some of them charge thousands of dollars for speaking engagements. $3,000, $5,000, $10,000 more for 1 or 2 days. And that's a fact. They're in it for the money, people. If you got somebody that's in it for the money, it's blatantly obvious. You go to your local church, and many of the local churches, they say it's not about the money. It is. I've said it before. They need to have money because they got a nice fancy building. They've got not just the minister who needs a pretty good income, because the bigger your church is, the more income you need, because that's how people know you're good. But also you got to have staff and so forth. Sure, it's about the money. But, you know, how far do you take that? Personally, I've never taken $1 for speaking or preaching or whatever. And maybe I'm not as good as they are. I don't know. It's up to somebody else to decide. But I'm told I'm pretty easy to listen to. I'm told I have fairly good knowledge of the Bible. I can see both of those. How easy am I to listen to? I don't know. That's hard for me to judge. How well do I know the Bible? Pretty good. And that's not meek and humble. That's being strong and courageous. It's confidence in what I've studied and how much I've learned. But I've applied myself to the Bible for 40 years. And I don't mean just reading it every week. I mean studying it for hours every week. Let's finish with, what does being a minister mean? What should being a minister mean? What am I looking for? What am I trying to get you to see? People, here's the thing. Minister. And many preachers will say, we are all ministers of God. Well, they got that right. Now let's see if they live up to it. And let's see if you live up to it, okay? Minister is actually from a Latin word that means somebody who serves, ministers to, or somebody who serves in authority of somebody else. As in, we minister in the name of Christ. It's much as Jesus said when he washed the disciples' feet, I did not come to be served, I came to serve. How does your local minister stand up? How do you stand up? You know, church potlucks are a favorite of mine for this. Many times at potluck, people say, oh, let the pastor go first. You know, he's a servant of God and he deserves the honor. Well, sure he does. And if he's at all a decent minister, he's going to say, thank you very much, people, but instead of going first, I'm going to wait and go last, and while I'm waiting, I'm going to stand behind the table and I'm going to serve you. Now that's being a minister. Visiting ministers at many churches are giving public acclamation. Oh, it's so nice to have Pastor John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt here today from the big time church of the big city, and he's written 16 books and cut 22 DVDs, and we really want to honor him for being here present, and his beautiful wife standing next to him. I don't remember her name because we don't really care about her, but I want you both to stand up and everyone give them a praise offering. Hogwash. If this wasn't a sermon going out to Christians, I'd say bullshit, because that's what it is. But I didn't say that. It offends some people. Why don't we honor somebody? Oh, look, we have a visitor here. I don't know your name. Sir, could you stand up and introduce yourself as well as your wife and your children? Oh, and here's another visitor over here. And I don't care how they're dressed. Look like they come off the street. If you're going to acknowledge one person that's a visitor, you better acknowledge everybody. That's the way it should be, people. I get very uncomfortable when I go to a church and they actually introduce me. It happens. Not very often. Not very often. I've sat through churches where I was introduced to the pastor before the service by one of the local members who was very excited to have me there. And during the service, the pastor introduced to the whole congregation somebody else and ignored me. I'm actually okay with that. I find it rather humorous. I get very uncomfortable when I get the honor like that. First off, I don't look like a minister, and if I get introduced as one, people are like, "What?" It's okay. I'm not looking for that, people. So if I come visiting your church, please don't do that. I just don't think it's a good idea. I have often said, if the President of the United States and the last Super Bowl MVP and a homeless person come to my house all at the same time on the same day, they will all get treated the exact same way. And believe me, I don't have to worry about it because my family will take care of it. In our house, somebody may or may not go get you a drink. They may just tell you, well, it's in that refrigerator over there. Go help yourself. Oh, you're hungry and we're not going to eat for a while yet. Why don't you just go fix yourself a sandwich? That's the way we are. To me, that's just being real. One last little query. Now, I have limited ability to walk, so I have handicapped parking. And sometimes the family just drops me at the front door, and then they go park someplace else, and that way I don't have to walk very far, and they don't use the handicapped parking. But let me ask you a question. On Monday through Saturday, does anyone going to the church need reserved parking? I'm just asking. This is about being a minister, both for your pastor and for you. It's nice. I know a church, they no longer meet in that building, but they used to have the nearest parking area had some handicap parking. It had parking for senior citizens, and it had parking for visitors. And everyone else had to park quite a ways out. You know, even though we visited 4 or 5 times a year because that's where my mother and sister went, we usually parked all the way out. These days I don't do that because I can't. But, you know, just because the special honored parking space is there for you doesn't mean you have to use it. And that, to me, goes with ministers too. Monday through Saturday, if the pastor wants to go to the church building, he doesn't need a reserved space. There's plenty of parking available. Close. And it really gets frustrating to me when you have reserved parking nearest the door for senior pastor, senior pastor's wife, associate pastor, associate pastor's wife, other associate pastor, other associate pastor's wife, church secretary. And how far do we take this list? Oh my goodness. So all the best spaces go to the ministers? I don't think that's right. Now, some churches don't get that carried away, but some do. Now, the church that is right next door to us where we live, their pastor doesn't have reserved parking, and it's a big church. I asked him one day about it because I noticed that. He said, yeah, I don't need reserved parking. There's always plenty of spaces up front. And he said, on Sunday, I'm always one of the first people here. And so I don't need reserved parking. He said, in fact, I park as far away from the front door as I can. Now, this man's in his 60s, pushing 70, I don't know. He's older than I am. But he's still able-bodied and he walks. And he said, you know what, Velcro? He said, all of my staff do the exact same thing. Why? Because he's a minister. He's setting the example, and they are following his example. Now, that's a minister. He doesn't have to have an upfront parking space. Leave it for the people that need it. Now, for the rest of us, when we go to that church, or any church, visitor or regular attender, do we find the parking space closest to the front? For that matter, when you go to Walmart or Safeway, I don't care. Do you look for the space closest to the front so that you don't have to walk? Or are you willing to park a little ways out so that somebody else may be blessed with not having to walk so far? Now that's being a minister. Meek and humble. Sure. But that's sometimes the pendulum swinging too far this way. And you go, whoom. And if you aren't way over here on the meek and humble scale, they're going to tell you you're not meek and humble. If you go all the way over here, you aren't meek and humble, and everyone knows it. You need to find the center. You get the confidence from God. You get the strength from God. You get the courage from God. And you use it for God on behalf of others. There's the dividing line. If you've listened this far, this is so important. I want you to get this. The dividing line between meek and humble and not meek and humble is others. Jesus came to serve others. The Almighty Son of God, the perfect Son of God, who has every right to say, I rule, came to serve others. John 3:17 says, the Son of Man did not come to condemn the world. He didn't need to condemn people. People know they aren't perfect. Do you serve others? Philippians 2, do you put others first? There's the dividing line. Is it about you and your honors? I want to be recognized. Well, sure, we all like that. But we should fight against it. I want the best for me, the best parking space, the best salary, the best whatever. Sure, I understand that it's human nature. We should fight against it. And yeah, just in case you're wondering, I think no matter how big the church is, I think ministers that are paid for preaching and not much else, they ought not to be paid. Now, yes, I have served in that capacity for 3 years in one church. I preached 3 sermons in every 2 weeks, and I taught Bible classes twice a week. Didn't draw a penny. I did hospital visits, attended business meetings, did some counseling, and I had a day job and a family. And I took time for my family. I've said it before and I'll say it again. Paid clergy is a real problem to me. Do we need it? Nah, I don't think so. But who's going to do all the counseling? Well, first off, most pastors don't do that much counseling. Second, you should have somebody in there in the church that's like a board of elders or a board of deacons or something. These are supposed to be spiritually mature men, supposed to be physically mature usually, depending on what your congregation is. Hard to do with a startup. But you got mature men that are retired. Let them learn how. And they can teach others to take their place. We're in this together, people. And, oh, by the way, standing in the pulpit and then telling somebody else they aren't meek and humble seems like the pot calling the kettle black. It always bothers me when I preach. It bothers me when I'm preaching right now. I'm not feeling very meek and humble because I'm trying to get you to see it my way. And that's not really what I'm trying to do, but it is. I believe I understand what the Bible's saying here. I believe what I'm trying to do is persuade you of that. And I'm doing that because I believe that God gave me the ability and the gift and the understanding to do this. Yet at the same time, I recognize the irony of trying to say, you need to be meek and humble. Because by saying that, I'm not being meek and humble. Now, I think this is the longest I've ever talked on this topic in my life. Of course, I'm getting old and I want to make sure it's clear. Because it's so important. This concept is used to put people down. This concept is misunderstood. And thus people are misled about what being meek and humble is. If you have questions, call me, 307-256-9324. Text me. Facebook me, Don Olin, OHLIN, aka-Velcro. Email me, velcro@churchwithanattitude.com. Comment on this video. If you've got questions, if you've got criticism, open up. Just let me know. I really do love and care for everybody. Everybody I have any influence with, anybody I meet. My motto is seeking the lost and motivating the found. Kind of covers all of us. Well, just like God, I love you.